Date, Wednesday the 21st of February 1945. Location, RAF Linton-on-Ouse, North Yorkshire. The Second World War is entering its final stages. In only 76 days, Nazi Germany will surrender. And tonight, a Royal Canadian Air Force Halifax bomber takes off. The plane from 408 Goose Squadron, call sign NP711, destination southern Germany. But the aircraft and its 7-man crew are never to return. Official reports will later mention a crash and no known survivors. But exactly where has it come down, and how? A question that for decades will remain unanswered.
They were aiming for the city of Worms, the industrial area, the railroad system over there.
The railway station in Worms is the Canadian Halifax's main objective. It's a key enemy communications link and must be severed. But as the bomber nears the station, things don't go to plan. So what happens to the plane? Over the next 70 years, details will become hazier, eventually lost in time. Until, that is, Dutch crash site detective Erik Wieman reopens the case. If anyone can find Halifax NP711's final resting place, it's Erik. His meticulous research has revealed at least 26 Second World War crash sites.
They explode in thousands of pieces, yeah, and many pieces were, that laying on top were taken away by the Germans after the crash. So it's mainly it's smaller parts that you find, yeah, personal finds, smaller parts of the aircraft, aluminium. So and even when a plane crashes somewhere else, in the field, it's when it goes nose down. It's like everything is pressed together and it's very unrecognizable for people who do not know how a real crash looks. Yeah.
Erik's interest in military planes begins in the 1980s as a Marine paratrooper. He's also one of the few Dutch soldiers to be attached to Britain's Royal Marines.
And then we did the mountain training with the 4-5 Commando Royal Marines. Our company, which company was totally Dutch until 1990.
The British know Erik only as Wieman, but soon nickname him He-Man. The experience will also shape an understanding of wartime Allied air crews.
So it's not totally strange for me, yeah. So I have a little bit of a connection to them. That's definitely. I understood their routine because I had it for years myself, yeah. And what they did in the barracks and things like that, yeah. And what they ate, yeah. I ate the same for years.
But on a night in late February 1945, few on board Halifax NP711 will think of food. Tension will be running high as the bomber closes in on its target, the railway station in the South German city of Worms.
It was extremely dangerous with all this flak and flying in the dark. So it took a lot of skill to get here in the target area. They almost reached their target, but not until the end. Just beforehand, it was shot down.
Erik knows from wartime reports that NP711 crashes west of Worms. But exactly where? To find out, he'll need skills developed in his time after the Dutch Marines. Erik moves near Ludwigshafen in Germany, also rich in ancient history, and reawakens a lifelong interest in archaeology. But a chance discovery will spark what is to become a quest.
When I first started to find aluminium parts in the field, I wanted to know what these were, because in the beginning I did not even recognize them. Yeah? And then I started to find out, hey, this with rivets in it, this must be a plane. This is very interesting. This is a crash site. This probably is a crash site. And then I found more and more and more parts. I found a coin, and then I found out, because of the numbers on these plane parts, I found out it was what kind of aircraft this was. And then people came to me, contemporary witnesses, and they told me about, I know a crash site here, I know a crash site there, and then gave me a little bit of information, American, English, Canadian, and things like that. And and then it started to roll.
To Erik, his golden key is the evidence of German wartime eyewitnesses. One who stands out is Werner Rabenheimer. He remembers the final months of the Nazi regime and the absentee adult men sent away to defend the fatherland, recording too in his diary how at only 16 years old and still at school he mans an anti-aircraft battery.
In 4,500 meters height, there was an aircraft coming, and it got real fire from us. That's how it's translated. So they were shooting at it with all batteries, and soon it was burning.
Und manchmal hat man 2, 3 gesehen, aber viel hat man nicht gesehen. Das hat uns Spaß gemacht. Und dann auch die bösen Engländer, die bösen Amerikaner und alles Mögliche. Wir waren dort 15, 16, 17.
Werner Rabenheimer doesn't hold the key to Halifax NP711's location, but there's someone who might. Local newspapers are following the hunt for the World War II crash site. Reports catch the eye of Rainer Hanewald.
Das war in der Zeitung, in der Presse war ein Aufruf, wer etwas weiß, sollte sich mal melden unter der und der Telefonnummer. Das habe ich gemacht, weil ich gedacht habe, naja, da kann man vielleicht eine Hilfestellung geben. Und das habe ich gemacht.
Hanewald, born after the war, lives in the village of Leistadt. He recalls a relative, Klaus Hanewald, often describing a wartime bomber crash. An aircraft narrowly missing Leistadt, hitting a steep, densely wooded hillside.
Der hat mir gesagt, da ist ein kanadischer Flieger abgestürzt und man hat das vom Dorf aus beobachtet. Da gibt es noch Zeugen, die das gesehen haben. Der war so wie jeder andere im Dorf, wo die Möglichkeit hat, daher zu gehen, dann nochmal hergegangen und hat geguckt.
Klaus Hanewald is no longer alive, but Rainer relays his words, showing Erik what he believes to be the impact zone.
Das war, ich will nicht sagen Schock, aber das war ein Mitgefühl vom ganzen Dorf, dass da junge Menschen gestorben sind. Man hat ja gewusst, junge Menschen sind jetzt da umgekommen. Man hat nicht genau gewusst, wie viel, aber man hat gewusst, es sind Menschen umgekommen.
To find Halifax NP711, this eyewitness account from the grave could be crucial. Klaus Hanewald's evidence from the past, compelling. And in a strange twist, even his final resting place is yielding clues. In Leistadt Cemetery's burial register, Erik has discovered something. Unidentified Allied airmen initially buried here, only after the war, assessed by investigators to be remains of 6 of the crew, then exhumed and reburied in Germany at the Rheinberg War Cemetery. But there is a name further north at a graveyard in Weissenheim. It's pilot officer Donald Sherman, his body found there attached to a parachute.
Nothing has been heard of from this aircraft since takeoff.
Sherman is a name Erik has already seen in official Air Force records.
Also, the cemetery books, you know, they had their names, and yeah, everything matched. So everything matched. It was I expected. I found what I expected was expected to find.
Leistadt is only a few miles southwest of the city of Worms. Could this be where the bomber ends up? Deep in the primeval forest, Erik notices telltale signs.
Very dense woods over there, but not here.
Where there should be ancient trees, there are only younger ones. He suspects it's the signature of a massive explosion.
Then I went up, walked into this dent over there, put a few leaves away, and I found a part of an aircraft.
But is it from the Halifax that flies from Linton-on-Ouse in late February 1945? Call sign NP711, crewed by 6 Canadians and a Royal Air Force engineer. To get answers, Erik will have to excavate the site. But first, he'll need a permit from the Regional Department of Archaeology.
Erik ist derjenige, der eben dann durch seine akribische Recherche eben rausfindet, wo die Fundstellen eben sind. Das ist ein ganz wichtiger Beitrag. Es ist für uns genauso wichtig wie eine römische Fundstelle oder wie andere vorgeschichtlichen Fundstellen. Das wird bei uns genauso gehandhabt und ist genauso relevant für unsere tägliche Arbeit letztendlich. In der Archäologie war der Zweite Weltkrieg noch vor kurzem kein relevantes Thema oder nicht so intensiv. Und von daher ist es natürlich überraschend für uns, dass es so viele Fundstellen gibt, die wir eben auch zu schützen müssen.
Some of Erik's World War II finds are now exhibited in a public museum. In modern Germany, the story of Nazi atrocities is well known, taught in every school, the intention to curb German nationalism and any glorification of conflict. But it's meant fewer lessons about how the Second World War was actually fought, a knowledge gap that some feel is time to correct.
Ich glaube, das ist ein sehr, sehr guter Moment, um der Bevölkerung, vor allen Dingen der lokalen Bevölkerung, einfach zu zeigen, was eben vor 60, 70, 80 Jahren hier passiert ist, um einfach da nochmal zu zeigen, was die ganze Zeit in der Erde geschlummert hat, eigentlich vor der Haustür, und man wusste eigentlich gar nichts davon, und welche Geschichten einfach auch erzählt werden können.
Erik wants to fill in the blanks about Halifax NP711. 73 years later, he believes he's pinpointed the location.
This place is forgotten, and now we're going to make this place visible. You know, we want to find proof of this crash, proof of the crew members who were in it, what kind of aircraft this was.
Now the Regional Archaeology Department has granted permission to excavate. Time for the crash site detective to assemble his team. Erik thinks that a large area of unusually young trees is the sign of a huge blast. What's revealed just below the surface now confirms his suspicion. A distinct layer of blackened, scorched earth, and it's everywhere.
It went uphill, downhill, approximately 200 meters, and also wide. Same, 200-300 meters in width, yeah.
The cause of what seems to have been a widespread inferno becomes clear. As Erik's team begin to find aircraft debris, they also unearth the remains of incendiaries. The bomber's lethal payload never jettisoned, erupting in a huge fireball on impact with the hill.
The area was burning, the witnesses said, after the crash. The whole hillside was burning here.
The remote part of the forest is where few normally venture. Anything that wasn't removed in 1945 is still on the ground.
The bigger parts were taken away because, metal was precious at the time for the Germans. Normally at sites that are sometimes also in the woods that are flat, you don't find bigger parts on the surface. Not many people walk here, so we still had a chance to find a little bit bigger parts.
The former Dutch Marines team has been going since 2016, locating crash sites not only in forests and fields, but even in back gardens.
And most of our guys in our group have a military background, so they have a sense of, how do you say it, it's not so strange what you find. So even when it's fragmented, you can recognize it pretty good sometimes.
An asset when looking for traces of a bomber and its contents, says Heiko Zeck. His day job, a German Army nuclear, biological and chemical warfare specialist.
I know what I have in my hands and can see, is it an explosion or is it noch an ammunition who can use? So I think it's very good that I'm from military and have a little bit experience for that.
Because when it slid in this direction, it was laying here, it just,
Even the smallest find, like a cartridge, can offer clues to an aircraft's fate.
Yeah, exploded. The primer is missing. I didn't see a date. Must be a date. But definitely exploded in a fire. And when I know there's a certain field maybe, or an area where a plane crashed, when I find this, I can see 303. I check the date, if it matches the crash date. I see it exploded in a fire and the primer is missing. So this was not fired, this was in a fire and exploded. So then I see this aircraft, when I find aircraft parts of course, it's probably British. Yeah.
There's no shortage of ordnance aboard Halifax NP711. Records show that the bomber was carrying a blockbuster, a 2,000-pound bomb that could pulverize whole streets. But in the forest, Erik finds evidence of another deadly weapon, a sticky, highly flammable mix of gels and petrochemicals called napalm.
You still see the red markings on it. On impact, it just bursted.
In the 1960s, napalm was controversially used during America's war in Vietnam, but it first emerged during Allied air raids at the end of the Second World War. Surviving examples, says the former Dutch Marine, are extremely rare.
But I never seen one before, and then I tried to check the British bomb catalogue, and then I found it. The measurements fit, everything fits, the markings fit. Yeah, and it just fell out of a plane, or it just but the contents probably set all the wood on fire here. Yeah.
Erik says that even after 70 years, crash sites can still be hazardous.
Next 100 feet or 50 meters to the left was full of grenade shells, small, bigger ones, 8.8, 3.7, 8.8, 10.5, 12 and a half. It was from artillery shells till flak shells, everything. So and most of them were live, not fired.
In a different wood, one of his team's earliest and riskiest excavations. Another forgotten crash site, but uncomfortably close to a forgotten German ammunition dump.
Now, this place was pretty dangerous because also there are people walking by. There's a road over there. I found a 12.5 shell like this, and only 3 meters next to the road. People walking by with kids here, when they go into the woods here, some pieces were still sticking out of the ground. So it was pretty dangerous, I think, and they're all live.
The other grim prospect during an excavation is finding human remains.
Yeah, we found these parts here. They're very oxidized, and there were these. I have a few pieces in my hand here, bone parts attached to it, to this piece of metal.
Bone fragments have featured in Erik's latest archaeological investigation. It's not clear if they're from animals or from people. The finds will have to be documented and analysed by the authorities. Official reports sent to embassies of nationals thought to have been in the crash.
It brings us back to what happened here all these years ago, and and it also helps to figure out what really happened here, what plane it was, what crew it was.
But if identified as human, the bones could solve a riddle, because records say this should be a Royal Air Force Lancaster crash site, an aircraft with a British crew. But the official account contradicts what Erik has unearthed. There are badges that shouldn't be here. Not British, but Canadian.
This crash site in the books is probably not this crash site that we found. We don't even know what aircraft this was. So the bones are even the next question. Yeah.
To make a breakthrough, Erik needs to dig up something personal, like the bracelet found where a Dakota passenger plane came down.
I found a bracelet, and I turned it around, and first I saw, from Mom, and then I turned it around and saw a name. One of the names I had in my mind from the the crew passenger list, and so this 99.9% was now 100%.
And in the middle of wreckage at the same crash site, a set of false teeth, dated by a dental specialist to the 1930s or 40s, also matching the medical records of one of the passengers.
45 years old, and from the medical I saw he had some problems with his teeth, and then we found these teeth. So this is, how personal is that? These small personal finds are even more important, I think, than big plane parts. It's nice for in the museum, these big plane parts, but these small parts, these are, when you find something like this is so personal. He had it on his hand, on his arm, before he died. It was ripped off, So then you start to imagine what happened here, and then it's very emotional.
Back at his hillside site, Erik is now sure that he's traced Halifax NP711. Numbers on parts he's unearthed are unique to Halifax bombers. To the former Dutch Marine, evidence of the bomber's location is incontrovertible. He's found Halifax NP711, and it's time to tell the crew's living relatives.
He was my great uncle. He was my grandmother's brother. He was born in a small village, and I think he was just looking for some excitement. As a young man, he joined the Air Cadets and then moved on to the Royal Air Force. They were so proud of him, going away and joining the Air Force and obviously going to war to fight for the country.
In February 1945, Jimmy Wilson is attached to Canada's 408 Goose Squadron, a flight engineer from Douglas in Lanarkshire assigned to Halifax NP711. And when the bomber takes off on its fateful final mission, he's only 20. All his family will learn is that he's been killed in action, later given a headstone in the Rheinberg Commonwealth War Cemetery in Germany.
We knew that Jimmy's remains were in Rheinberg, and my uncle's been there. We didn't even know roughly, we just knew that the crew were going to bomb Worms, and we had no idea, exactly where the crash site was.
Then one day, out of the blue, a message from a Dutchman living in Germany called Erik Wieman.
He put an advert in our local newspaper seeking out the family of Jimmy Wilson. And that's how we managed to get in contact with him. We had no idea that he had found the site or that he was doing any work. To get this information, it was phenomenal, and excitement, what's going to happen, what they're going to find.
Erik tries to trace relatives early on in his investigations. Giving families answers is what he says drives him most, right from his very first crash site discovery.
I found out that afterwards that people died there, and then I thought I have to do the families know, and I will try to reach them. And then I found the first family, the second family, and they didn't know a thing. They knew that that their family members died in the war in Germany, but not where and not how, and they didn't know anything. Also for the families, and a lot of them can find closure now.
Yes, that's me.
Today, Erik is meeting another relative for the first time. Matt Wakeham is from Australia. Erik wants to show him a crash site he's preparing to excavate.
Also behind this school nursery, that's where it crashed. Yep. And the woods over there, on that side.
A Lancaster bomber, he thinks, shot down near Ludwigshafen on the 5th of January 1945. The pilot, Matt's grandfather. Flying officer Charles Wakeham, managing to bail out in the narrowest of escapes.
I didn't really ever meet him. Sadly, he passed away in 1992 when I was 2 years old. There is one photo of him holding me as a baby, and I think that's the only real interaction that I had with him. He didn't talk about the story, according to my dad, very often, but from what I can gather, he did tell the story once. The plane was on fire, they'd been hit, obviously, and he had to take himself out of the seat, and he was wading through, knee-high plane fuel, trying to get out of the plane where the tail had been broken off at the back. And I think the story is that he got caught as he's coming out. His parachute got caught in the door. He had to pull himself in, and just at the last second was able to get out and bail out, and fortunately survived. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here. So.
It's only 2 weeks since Erik contacted Charles Wakeham's son in Australia, learning to his surprise that the Lancaster pilot's grandson now lives in Germany. And not only that, he and the Dutchman work in the same complex, a large chemical plant in Ludwigshafen, which in the strangest twist of all was Matt's grandfather's target.
So many coincidences, and then only a few days later we got in contact, and now we're standing right here. That's really amazing. Yeah, and I read in your father's information that your grandfather landed in a tree.
Yes, that was I was going to bring up.
So it must have been somewhere around here, in this area here. Maybe a little bit into the woods. But this was the area where they were rounded up after they bailed out. Many times like this, when the civilians are first to get the soldiers, when they landed here, they were beaten. And some of them were beaten, and they were very aggressive. Usually the soldiers come and save these enemy soldiers, from being lynched. And this is the place where the German aircraft crashed, right in front, directly in front of us.
Erik's research has also revealed that as the Lancaster is shot down, so too is a German Messerschmitt fighter plane, a victim of friendly fire.
And maybe he was flying on his parachute and saw this plane crash. It's also possible.
But I think that really just speaks to what a chaotic, really tells a very vivid kind of story of this sort of chaotic air battle that was going on, and what happened those days. So, yeah.
But Erik won't be looking for wreckage. The pilot survived, he says. The Dutchman has only one goal: to rediscover crash sites where people lost lives, finally allowing families to know what happened. And in the case of Halifax NP711, bringing families of the crew to Germany, together for the first time in the forest where the bomber's doomed mission ended.
I've had some information come time and again over the years, but nothing like the flood of information I've had now. So it's really startling for me, gratifying for me to know exactly what had happened on that night.
But there have been no gatherings like this for German Second World War airmen. Feelings about the war and the Nazis have been bottled up for decades. Erik has located crash sites where German airmen died, but for some, commemorating people seen as fighting for Hitler is still too difficult, even for their own families.
I also tried to put a little plaque at a German crash site. I contacted the family in Bavaria, and he said, the Nazi time, I don't want to be connected to this. And I said, but it's your family, And he said, no, don't. He didn't want to come.
But there are few misgivings about remembering a Canadian bomber crew. Even Werner Rabenheimer, who was a boy shot down Allied aircraft, is here. The local community has paid for a memorial where Halifax NP711 crashed.
From a German point of view, as the German national representative here, it is also important to understand that we, Germany, are now an integral part of the alliance, of NATO, of the European Union, and therefore went in just 77 years a long way from where we were in World War II. I actually witnessed two friends in my own squadron dying in Goose Bay, but having that spot in Goose Bay marked with a memorial like this was an important thing for us, because every time I ended up in Goose Bay, I went there and said hello to my friends.
Memorials now mark 6 of the crash sites that Erik has located.
And he never literally leaves a single stone unturned. So he finds the site, he finds all that there is to be found. He then gets the local input, he gets the history, he gets the witnesses, he then does all the research. He's so thorough with his organisation to then bring the families together, to bring the local community together, and never forgets anybody in the whole process. And that's the difference that Erik Wieman makes compared to others that just find a site and say, oh, look, a crashed aircraft. Erik does the full thing.
A parachute in the trees symbolically commemorates Donald Sherman, the only crewman to bail out, but far too late.
In 1945, it's pretty hard to relate to a war that goes across the ocean. Like these days, those days, you didn't have internet and see everything within a minute. So to commit to a war and make that kind of sacrifice for something that is happening like way out there, it's difficult to understand. Now, our duty, and thanks to Erik, is to actually making sure that our kids remember that story.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. I think it's brought a lot of peace for us as a family, and we'll take this back because he was one of 9, so there are lots of other great nieces and nephews and nieces and nephews, so we'll go back and pass all this information and the story on, and they'll be overwhelmed. They really will.
Erik has now uncovered 11 long-forgotten World War II crash sites. He's located another 15 downed aircraft that he hopes to positively identify.
He could be in my estimation, a pioneer in this type of excavation. You can assess the care and the attention he gives by how he identifies each and every piece of debris. I mean, you get a little piece of aluminum like this, it's all bent up and burned, but he knows exactly where it belonged. I mean, that's attention to detail. That is someone who knows aircraft, knows World War II bombers.
His goals: to explain where the men on board lost their lives, to enlighten families kept in the dark for so many years, and to honour those who perished and to keep their memory alive. Exactly as he has done for the bomber crew of Halifax NP711.
This place would have normally been forgotten. And now it's there for all the coming generations.